So what is the theory of evolution when all is said and done? Theory of evolution tells us that the fittest mutations of a biological form are going to be the most fit. No, it tells us they're going to survive, right? The fittest versions of a biological form are going to survive. Well, now how do you test that hypothesis? How can you tell which proved to be the most fit? Let me give you an example. Perhaps we have two versions of a wolf, and the mutational difference between them is one version of the wolf has stronger hind quarters, stronger back legs. Now, you might, at the outset, think, well, that's going to make that wolf more fit for survival. Why? Because it's going to get to the kill more often first. It's not going to be the part of the flock of wolves that doesn't get fed enough and so forth. It's going to leave more offspring, on and on it goes. Well, the problem, though, is that because biological forms have a delicate balance within them, other things have to be considered. It's also possible that the mutated hind quarters, the stronger back legs, are going to put too great of a strain upon the heart, which is not grown to accommodate that kind of muscular strength in the legs. So that over time, when you do an analysis, that particular kind of wolf may tend to die earlier from heart attacks. And so knowing that these are possibilities, this is very plausible, by the way, it can go either way. Stronger hind quarters means you get the food first. Stronger hind quarters means that over time, that kind of wolf dies from heart attacks. So, in order to test the hypothesis of survival of the fittest, you have to be able to identify which forms are the fittest. And then you say, by prediction, these should be expected to survive. Let's wait and see. But it turns out the only way you can identify those which are the fittest is to what? Wait and see. And so the theory which Darwin gave to the world as its great hope, the survival of the fittest, turns out to be nothing more but a tautology. All Darwin taught us is that those creatures that survive are the ones that will survive. Now, I'm not playing any debate tricks with you here. Again, unbelievers have published this stuff in philosophy journals for years. The theory is simply not a scientific theory. It's a way of looking at the world. And it's not defended by scientific evidence. Gould already admitted that. Philosophers have known this for years. All the evidence that is enlisted in favor of evolution is evidence that it's interpreted by the theory of evolution. And so it turns out that the theory of evolution doesn't explain how different species came about in the first place at all. It only tells us the ones that came about. They had more progeny than others. Moreover, natural selection upon analysis proves not just to be a convenient way of speaking. Evolutionists cannot get away from talking about personal attributes in what they call nature. When Christians or anti-evolutionists do a cross-examination of some of the arguments and evidence for evolution, they'll often ask questions about how can you expect nature to have been so creative as to do these various things. And they'll say, how could blind random chance have done this? And the comeback is, maybe nature's more creative than you thought. They talk about natural selection. Well, as you know, blind forces don't select anything, do they? I find it fascinating that when I was studying logic early on, as a student in college many years ago, the illustration that I was given of what's called the fallacy of reification is talking about what nature does. Reification is turning a set of unconnected events into a personal form. It reifies, makes a substance out of something that is not a substance. When Bill Clinton was elected president, people said the winds of change are blowing through our culture. Well, you know, the winds of change is a reification of the events which are different from previous events. There are no, quote, winds of change. So that's a way of speaking. When it's taken seriously and used in an argument, it's the fallacy of reification. You're treating an abstract personification as though it were a concrete substance. And yet evolutionists are found to repeatedly talk about what nature does, the creativity, the selection that takes place there. Moreover, whenever evolutionists want to explain their theory, you will find they always use analogies to things like animal breeders. But the problem with the analogy should be obvious. There is no animal breeder for the whole world, unless, of course, you're a Christian, you're a creationist, and that's what they're trying to get away from. The notion of a purposeless natural process which, by chance, developed mutations that gradually changed life forms that fit in, adapted more to the environment, is a theory that has been thoroughly discredited, philosophically and scientifically. Why then does your next door neighbor hold to it? Why then do the professors at the university? At this point, it's usually helpful to go into the history of the theory of evolution, for people to realize the theory of evolution didn't arise with Charles Darwin, didn't arise with scientists at all. The theory of evolution arose with the philosophers. Anaximander, one of the earliest Ionian philosophers, was an evolutionist. We have other Greek philosophers that were evolutionists. The notion of gradual change as accounting for the world in which we live was already in the philosophical world thanks to Hegel before Darwin wrote. Karl Marx, who took Hegel and turned him on his head, teaching dialectical materialism rather than idealism, sought to dedicate his book Das Kapital to a man working in England at the same time he was there. His name was Charles Darwin. Evolutionary hypothesis did not arise from science. Science only gave it a cosmetic of respectability. The theory of evolution was refuted within 18 months of Darwin's book being published. But Darwin had captured the wave of where culture wanted to go. Darwin's bulldog, Huxley, openly admitted, as we studied the natural world, we always came up against a barrier that had written upon it no further exploration by order of Moses. Darwin gave us a way around the barrier. That's what he said. So the theory of evolution, what is our refutation of it? First of all, people need to know and be embarrassed by answering the fool according to his folly. It's not good science. Secondly, it's not science at all. It's philosophy. And it's desire-motivated speculation. It's speculation that is held onto. It's a worldview that's held onto, a perspective on how things happen in the world held onto, because it's the way in which we get around the doctrine of special creation by a personal God. Well, Dr. Bronson, is there any internal critique that can be made of the theory of evolution? Now that we know that it's a worldview, that it's a philosophy, that it's not good science at all, I'm going to give you a very quick one before we take a break. The theory of evolution, as a worldview, tells us once there was disorder, and we don't know why, but the disorder became ordered. And this ordered matter was inorganic. And we don't know why, but the inorganic matter became living. And then this living matter, which was all made up of identical forms, began to diversify. And then from these diversified living forms, for reasons we can't explain, they became varied, although unintelligent. But then the unintelligent life forms became intelligent and articulate. And then, for reasons we can't explain, the intelligent, articulate life forms became language-using, but not moral. And then the language-using life forms, for reasons we can't explain, became intelligent, articulate, moral men. And after I finished that is at every step a huge leap of faith, from nothing to something. That looks like creation out of nothing to me. It's just we don't want to say God did it. Nature did it on its own. Where'd the Big Bang come from? I want to know what went bang in the Big Bang. You know what you're told? That all of energy was condensed down to a mathematical point without dimensions. That sounds like nothing to me. And nothing went bang, and then we had the development of the world. Isn't that incredible? It's aping the Christian story, but not giving credit to the Creator. But anyway, once there was something, once there was nothing, then there was something. Then the something began to develop. And we don't know where life came from, but then it became alive. And we don't know where diversity came from, but then it diversified. And we don't know where intelligence came from, but then it became intelligent. Then it became linguistic. Then it became moral. And now we have man. But you know what the theory of evolution has going against it philosophically? It just requires far too much faith. Far too much faith. I guess that's my problem as a Christian thinker. You see, I just have this Sunday school simplistic notion that an all-powerful, all-knowing God could create the world, and that makes sense out of my experience. What doesn't make sense out of my experience is this idea of we can't tell you why, but from nothing to something, something to life, life to diversity, diversity to intelligence, intelligence to language, language to morality. But at every major step, from a quality becoming its opposite, matter is not intelligent in itself. And yet we're to believe that matter materially evolved into intelligence. Opposites things develop from their opposites and without any explanation. Well, that's not a rational worldview at all, when all is said and done. It's just a worldview held on incredible faith and contradictory faith. And that is the end of the story. Evolution is a worldview that makes no sense and cannot make sense out of life. Let's take a break.